Welcome back, everyone, to episode 19 of Show and Tell. This is just my small adventure to highlight the creators and contributors to the Magic the Gathering community. Today, I am super excited to be joined by musician, Magic player, photographer, Amie Waters. Amie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
We were just joking kind of before. We've kind of been trying to work this out for a little while, so I'm super excited we got to sit down and I don't want to say knock this out because I want to say this is not worth your time, but it's gonna be fun. We're gonna have a good time. It's gonna be a nice, relaxing conversation, hopefully for you. So, thanks again for joining. So, I always like to kind of start at the beginning. When I start the show. So, why don't you talk to me about your background in Magic? I think I looked, and you've actually been playing for a while, or at least you started kind of back in some of the earlier days of the game.
Yeah. Magic and I have had a on and off again relationship for most of my life. It's the kind of thing you never really quit. You just take hiatuses.
Yeah.
That's the way I think of it. So I bought the original Portal starter set when it first came out, which I think is 97.
That's about right. Yeah.
I think it was 97. It was, and also I remember buying Ice Age booster packs, and then Mirage came out, and that was my first big set that I got to buy a bunch of cards for. I was 11, so
yeah.
For me it was all about the art. I thought the cards were really pretty. I was playing mostly with my mom.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, she learned it with me. We so we got that 2-player starter set, and we set out the mats and learned how to play the game. And then I believe it was sometime in middle school that I really wanted a PS2, and so I took all my Magic cards to some local shop and said, "Can I have some money for these?" And they probably ripped me off, and
Probably, yeah.
I still to this day have no idea what I got rid of, but probably at least some good stuff in there. But then a bunch of my friends got back into it when I was in high school, and that was when I really started getting into actually building decent decks and kind of got into the game. Played a bunch in college because I had a friend who really liked playing, and he introduced me to this cool hip new thing that him and all his friends were doing, which was called EDH, and I thought it was really wild and loved the idea of it, and brought it home and introduced all my friends to it. Played a bunch right out of college. We would even host, we had kind of a big community house,
Yeah.
and we would host little tournaments and little drafts and stuff. And then when we moved to Portland about 10 years ago, we kind of, we packed up all our cards in big boxes, and then they sat in storage for 9 years, I think, 8 or 9 years.
Okay.
And we did take a quick break and bought a bunch of Kaladesh because my friend was really, really excited about hunting for masterpieces. And so he kind of got us back into it then. And then when I went to my first or second MagFest, a bunch of my friends invited me to a draft, and so I kind of got a little bit into it then. And then when Kamigawa Neon Dynasty came out, and I got to write music for it, Wizards sent us this little care package with it came with a box of set boosters and a bunch of cool pins and stuff, and that got me deep into it again, and I've been really into it ever since. I went from having my 3 old I don't even know what format to call them. They're just kitchen table Magic decks that don't follow a format.
Yeah.
And then I had my one singular EDH deck that was just Rainbow Get Out Progenitus deck. I went from that was my deck box to now I think I have 8 commander decks.
Oh,
so I've kind of gone deep into it, but it's been with me off and on throughout most of my life.
I think a lot of Magic players can understand that sentiment where once you kind of start playing, you never stop playing, right? You take breaks, and you eventually there's something that kind of brings you back in, or you get the itch. I always I joke with people that I've been playing since I'm gonna feel really old right now, since junior high, so that'd have been almost 25 years ago. So that's when the I think when the Urza's block was new, and I didn't I was a kitchen top grinder or sidewalk grinder, I guess. I played at lunch at school with my junior high was weird. We had 2 lunch periods. There was the first period lunch or second period lunch, and the second semester, I think of my 7th or 8th grade, all my friends were in the first period lunch, and I ended up in the second period lunch. So this is gonna sound really like bad, but I had to hang out with a bunch of my second tier. It's like friends, but like not people I normally hang out with. Gosh, that sounds
It's school.
Yeah, right.
School is all about rankings. There are definitely tiers of friendships back in middle school and high school.
Yeah. So it's all my top tier friends were at a different lunch, so I was hanging out with the other guys, and they all played Magic. So I was like, okay. And I think at that point I had already played a little of the Star Wars customizable card game, so I was like, oh, well, this is cool. So I kind of started getting it, and then from then on it was like you play for a few years and you take a break, and then either someone else gets into it, so you all you get back into it or whatever, and you take another break. And I remember I played a bunch my senior year of high school, and then we stopped, and then like went to college and found a bunch of new people who played, and then I think we played pretty consistently for probably about 2 years, 2 or 3 years, and then I took a long break between I think the time spiral block. Well, that's hard to say. Say that 3 times fast. Time spiral block. Until Dominaria came out, and I've been back in it since then. But yeah, it's just something something kind of hits you, and you see like see a new set, and you're like, oh, that sounds cool. Like you see a card or two, and you're like, oh, what's going on? What's going on there? And it's and I think for a lot of people, it's like I know the biggest thing for me was Commander / EGH kind of really got me kind of locked into the game. I think even longer than I would have been, because like you have all these old cards, and the idea of being able to just kind of shove a bunch of old cards together in a deck that maybe you wouldn't see play anywhere else. Was very, and that's kind of how my friends and I always played. Anyways, we never play. I couldn't have told you. I guess back when we were really playing, it was, I don't know, Type 1 or Type 2, maybe what the formats were called, but we were just shoving cards in decks, and we were doing like 6-player multiplayer games in the dorms, and it was just like, all right, well, let's just see, here's a 4-hour game we're going to get ourselves into tonight. Let's just see how it ends up. So,
yeah. I mean, for me, I don't even, like I said, when I first got into it, I think I was in like 4th or 5th grade. Yeah. So I was collecting Power Rangers cards as a younger kid, and so my experience of Magic was like playing with the Portal starter decks, and then I had a binder that I would bring to school, and I had a couple friends who I'd try to trade with. I always wanted to get all of the charms from Visions, because I just loved the way they looked, and that was like my goal as a kid. And it's like they're not even that hard to get, but I was like, I need to get all of them. And then it was when I was like either like right out of, I think it was right when I got back from college, and I was like kind of getting back into the game or bringing the game back to my friends. And I had this EDH deck, and one of my old buddies from like the old crew of musicians I played with in high school reached out, and we started reconnecting, and he was showing me all these wild deck ideas, because he was very much like a tinkerer. He was all about like coming up with weird combos, and he had this wild attrition deck that was all about like destroying things, getting them into his graveyard, and then giving them to you. And the goal was to like give you phage or give you some other thing. Like his goal was to give the other opponents things that would make them lose. And I love that idea so much that I kind of took it and made my own wacky Bronze Bombshell deck. And I had one that was like all Niv Mizzet and Psychic Possession and Teferi's Puzzle Box. So the goal was like every time my opponents are drawing cards, I'm drawing cards, and I'm damaging them with Niv Mizzet. They never worked. Like these decks were like way too many steps of the combo. But like that's what made it so easy when I got back into the game, is I converted the Niv Mizzet deck into a Nekasar Commander wheel deck. I converted almost all of my decks except for 2, because I have one friend who doesn't like playing Commander, and so I have to hold on to like these couple of decks so that I can play with him. But it was really easy to convert the decks to Commander, because I was already doing basically like Commander shit, but with these old decks, because it was all about weird combos and old cards and the ways I could make them interact in unique ways. So
that's funny. You're the charm thing. You probably reminds me, because I like to the game kills because I like cycles of things. I like having like, ooh, here's one of, and I can remember Prophecy had a cycle of avatars, and where it was like,
Yeah.
if there was something condition met, I think they only cost like 2 pips of whatever, 2 red or 2 green or whatever. And I was like, oh my gosh, these avatars are so cool. Like Avatar of Woe, I think probably to this day is still my favorite Magic card.
Nice.
But like in every deck, I could put an Avatar of Woe or Avatar of Hope. Like having like 5 avatars, like this is super cool. I think there's a bunch of. For a while, I was collecting avatars, not really realizing that it's not as a unique creature type as maybe it once was. But just stuff like that. If you get it for me, if I get a card and there's a cycle of them, I just like the collector itch in me. It's like, well, I need to get all of the cycles now. Like I need to have them in my binder, and I can look at them. Like you look at them, you're just like, yes, this pleases me. This it's and that's part of the. I mean, that's part of the fun of the game. It's just that I think especially it's the collecting aspect. A lot of times, just the way now they do a lot of the art styles or the frames or
yeah. I've got Boseiju over here, which was the song that inspired this. It was the song I wrote for the Kamigawa. So these are like I have like my 4 collectible cards, and they're one for every song that I wrote. So I've got Jetmir, and I've got Xander's Lounge, and I've got Boseiju, and then I've got my one super special. It's like the neon yellow Hidetsugu.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Which Wizards was kind enough to send to me in that like gift package.
Yeah.
And I kept that. I almost sold it a couple times because I'm like never going to play with it.
Yeah.
And one of my rules in general with Magic is I'm always reminding myself, like, because I get that feeling of like you flip through your binder and you see all the pretty cards and it feels really good. But I always have to remind myself, I'm like, this is a game. These are game pieces. If I'm not playing with them, I'm not an investor. That's not what I'm doing with this. Like, if there's cards that I might play with someday, like one of my buddies sold his Gaia's Cradle like a long time ago for like, I think he sold it for like $150. And he was like, oh, that's so much money. He's kicking himself now. And like stuff like that, I wish I had just so I could play with it. But like, if it's something that I'm looking at and I'm going, this isn't my style, I also, I share my collection with a couple of friends. So it's like, if I know no one's going to like this, no one's going to use this, I might as well trade that in and get more cards to play with. And, opening packs is always fun. But I keep these because I want to always remind myself that, like, you did this. This was a cool thing you got to do. And, like the company that currently produces Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering wanted you to write music for them. So let's remember that. Let's remember that your work was valued. Because as an artist, I deal with a lot of, like imposter syndrome. So I have to remind myself, this is a thing that happened. Yeah. You did this.
Oh no. So I was gonna kind of wait, but let's jump into your music because I think part of if you want to talk about not feeling imposter syndrome, feeling validated. So I first heard your music on the Continue Cast podcast, which if everyone who doesn't know, Continue is a YouTube show that it's 3 guys, they play a game, and after like 20 minutes, they either game over, continue, but they're funny. It's hilarious. They seem super cool, and they're always like super entertaining. And then they're
awesome people. I'm friends with all of them. They're great guys.
They seem super like super just like real and like real fun to be around. So and then they had a podcast for a while. There was like a long form. Usually it was like 2 or 3 hours where they would talk about a game or whatever. And it was like those were some of my favorite podcasts to listen to. But a lot of the music was done by you, right? You did, I think, the intro and thing. And then that podcast went away and came back for a while on their Patreon, blah, blah, blah. They haven't done a new podcast in a while. I'm a little annoyed. Not annoyed. I'm just like, I like their podcast. So I was like, I want to consume more content. But then I've also heard your music being used by them on the Pretend Friends podcast. Which I was like, oh, there's Amy's music, and I think we mentioned Kevin Cole, the creator of Space Kings, is the RPG system they use on Pretend Friends. I was just on. Yeah. It's all kind of related, but hearing your music again, and to me, I mean, I am such a big fan of everything you do, like musically, because not only do you I mean, your music is exactly like if I was a better musician, like the kind of music I'd want to create. But then a lot of like your, from your originals, like you have some fantastic albums. But then a lot of you do a bunch of like a lot of work in the video game kind of covers, and it's always like it's like Zelda music, it's all this other music that I love as well. So it's being able to kind of sit here with you. I'm trying not to fanboy out too much right now because like you are like in my eyes like this titan of like digital like video game music, and I'm just let me just tell you something. I am thank you for being a musician because your music is so amazing, and yeah. So I just okay. I'm again trying not to stand. I'm
It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Okay, so there's that. So let's talk about like music in general. Like when did you start getting into music? Like when did you like really decide like, oh, this is something like I'm going to pursue and like, really kind of get into that? Because, as someone who played in a silly little rock band in college, like playing music, like being a musician is fun, but it's hard. It is hard work. It takes a lot of effort, and you could really be good and just never kind of find what you're looking for. So I'm going to stop talking now. So let's talk to me about your music background.
I will. I did want to quickly say that when I said I went to in my story of me and Magic, I went to a con and a bunch of friends brought me to a draft and kind of got me back into it. That was Paul Ritchie and Kevin and a couple other people from that community, and we all went together because I was basically spent that whole weekend hanging out with those guys. So they were a part of my Magic journey. There was a time at one point where we talked about potentially working together on Magic content, but that never came to fruition because just all sorts of weird stuff with other people, which I'm not going to get into. But those guys are great. They're awesome. I actually guested on Pretend Friends. Played Danny Wonderlust, which was
that was
that was. I do DMing. Oh, sorry.
Oh, that was the when Hadley St. Clair was DMing correct. It was the second season, I believe. Second season.
No, I think it was when Kevin took back over. It was all I remember. There was like rainbow lightsabers and.
Okay, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, but it was a lot of fun, and it was also fun because I DM so for all my friend groups, and I kind of have this big ongoing world that I run with my friends. Mm-hmm. But it's very rare that I actually get to play. So getting to like do a little bit of role playing as a character was absolutely incredible. And I'm always hoping that like I'll get a call from them that they want me to do more Pretend Friends because it's super fun.
I remember now. You guys fought like a door or something, a giant door or a giant wall or something.
Yes,
I do remember the episode. That's right, because it was the third because there was the big Avengers meet of the pins. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yes.
Anyways,
that's right. Yeah.
So, anyways, music. I grew up in a household where my father is a guitar player, and he had a situation where his parents, I think due to one of his siblings getting into an instrument and then like never playing it, were like, no, we're not doing that again. We're not buying more instruments. And when he like saved up all of his money and finally got his first guitar, and like his guitar is where he found a lot of like, it's like very personal to him. It's almost spiritual to him. So like he wanted to make sure that when he saw that I was getting into music, that I was supported. He was like, I want to support what you do. And so like from a pretty early age, I started piano lessons. I did band from grade school on. I did saxophone in band. And it was in high school that I just got really, really caught up in, like, I was a huge band nerd. I took every music course I could until choir and band were at the same period in high school that I couldn't do both. Mm-hmm. And that's when I dropped out of choir and just did band. But I would do 0 hour, jazz lab, jazz ensemble, jazz combo, any band thing I could do, I took. And I also was like playing with friends in all sorts of different like little rock bands and stuff. And yeah, I fell in love with music, like throughout my childhood. Mm-hmm. Went to college on a saxophone scholarship to do.
Wow.
This is weird fun part of my backstory is I was a saxophone performance / youth ministry major at a small Christian college in Minneapolis. And then I dropped one of the majors, changed the other to composition, lost my scholarship, decided to come home anyways and get married, then went to 6 other colleges and never got a degree. So that's my college story is a lot of jumping around and realizing that I don't really need a degree for whatever I'm currently trying to work on, and then trying to find the degree I did need, and then eventually being like, all right, like 7 schools is enough. I don't need to keep trying this anymore.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a bad student. It was just like, if I realized that the program I was in wasn't meeting whatever need I had to like learn the thing I was trying to learn, the time I was trying to open a small business, and I was like, every business department I ended up in after I switched from composition to philosophy and business degrees, all the programs were like big business, like, and I was like, I need to know how to run a coffee shop. That's what I want to do, not anything like this. But anyways, yeah, so when I was in college, I had a friend who was really into like bedroom recording, and he was very much my guide into like audio engineering and recording and mixing and all that stuff. Whenever I needed like, hey, I need to get a new mic, he would point me in the right direction. My very first setup was a like Behringer mixer with the audio out going like RCA to 1/8 inch cable into the mic input on my like motherboard, and that was it. That was like my whole audio setup, and it was awful. It was it was really bad. But I wanted to try and record myself because like, yeah, like I was a very very involved kid in all the different, like I played at coffee shops and I played at like the like we had this big variety show at my school that I played at every year. And when I went to college, I was like, I want to try and record myself. So I started getting into it there, eventually got an interface, came back home after deciding to drop out of college, started making music with one of my like best friends. We recorded a couple of albums worth of really, really not great, super DIY sounding, like piano rock. I was really into Ben Folds at the time, so it's very Ben Folds-ish.
Okay, no, Ben Folds is that's a good influence. I like that.
Yeah,
Rocking the suburbs.
And then after doing that for like 3 years, I was like, I need to write something different. So I just sat down with a guitar and just was like, I'm not giving myself any limitations. I'm just gonna let what comes out. And I made this very like folk punky album,
Okay.
Which was when I that was around the time that I took up the moniker, which is fun little bit of irony in my life, called Motive Makes the Man. And I did a bunch of music under that moniker for a long time. And that time in my life, I never thought I would do music as a job. Like I never had any intention of becoming a professional musician. I just really liked making music. And so every year or so, I would be like, oh, I want to make a new album. I have all these song ideas that I've written down. And I always want to push myself to do the next thing. So like my second album was like a big double album that was all about the birth of my son and the death of my grandpa. So it's like life and death were the two sides of the album. Mm-hmm. And it was a very existential album. I was very much processing a lot of big emotions through my music. Started getting more into multi-tracking. There's a lot of there's all sorts of like cello and bells and stuff on that album. And then when we moved to Portland, I was like, I've released like 4 albums to almost no one. I have recorded countless hours of music, and every time I'm slowly getting a little bit better. I need to do something with this, like, because I'm not going to stop. That was the thing. Like you said, like you said, like I'm so happy that you're a musician, and like I can't think of anything else I would be doing, because like even when I was at my busiest, I was working a job where I was taking photos of houses for insurance companies. And that job was like, I was working a lot of hours to get paid very little, but I was doing it because I could also do music. I could set my own schedule.
Yeah.
And realizing that, like, even when I'm the busiest, I'm still making music. I'm never going to stop doing this. I should figure out a way to make this be the thing that also helps, pay my mortgage. And so when we were in Portland and I decided to kind of pivot to doing it full time, I had three paths ahead of me, and it was live performance. I had just finished an album, and this was around the time that I started getting into synths, which it's funny because like a lot of what I do nowadays is synthesizer based, and it's very much a part of my like aesthetic and my vibe.
Yeah.
I recently, like, it was last year now, but I released my like Raccoon Mom synth shirt. So it's like very much in my all about what I do right now. It's very much a part of my brand, you could say. But I didn't start that until we moved to Portland, and I bought like a Moog and my Tempest because I was obsessed with Sufjan Stevens' album Age of Odds, which is still one of my all-time favorite albums. But I love the way that Sufjan, like, after making multiple albums of like orchestral symphonic pop, was like, I'm gonna do wacky synth music now. And it was like the weirdest I had ever, like, it's like nothing I had ever heard before, what he was doing with synthesizers. And I was like, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And so I bought a couple. This was around the time I was like, I'm going to make an investment into doing music. I like bought a really nice mic, a really nice interface, got a couple of synthesizers, and was like, all right, I'm going to finish this album, and then I'm going to tour the album. I'm going to play open mic nights and try to get like Friday night gigs. I'm going to pay my dues, gigging. Yeah. I'm going to get like a modest pedal board, and I'm going to go on the street and do like ambient loop music and busk on the street in Portland, because busking is like a really big thing in Portland.
Yeah.
And then I'm also going to try, because I had a pretty decent camera. I had a 5D Mark II. And I was like, I'm gonna make videos. I'm gonna try and make music videos on YouTube, and we'll see what happens. And busking was devastating to my soul. It was awful. I couldn't do it. The idea of having people walk by you not caring, and like I can't not be. All of my music is very emotive, so it's like I'm putting myself into my music and just having person after person after person just be like, you are a nuisance to me. You're not even like neutral, you are negative. I don't like the fact that you are here. It just didn't work.
Yeah.
And then for like gigging, if I were to keep doing that, it would mean I would be away from my family for more time, and I just couldn't do that. I couldn't make it work with my life, because I'm very involved as a parent with my kid and my family, my partner. So I was like, I don't want to be gone all the time. And it was right around that time that I covered Sticker Bush Symphony, and it was my first VGM, and it blew up, and a lot of people watched it, and I got really excited, and I had all these other video game songs I wanted to cover, so I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to focus on this. I'll let the other ones go. And yeah, and that's what I've now been doing for like coming up on 9 years, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's been a lot, or maybe 8 years only. I don't know. I've been doing it for a long time. And yeah, and it's just kind of it's always flowed out of like, this is just, what I've wanted to do, chasing my passion, like always seeking what inspires me. And now I'm making some original music and doing my cover stuff, and I get really awesome opportunities to do things like write music for a podcast, or I'm currently writing music for a pinball game, which is really, really cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things. And yeah, and just music is very much an extension of who I am, and I think no matter what happens, I'll keep making music. So.
Well, I mean, good. I'm glad. I definitely think the essence of yourself is displayed through a lot of your music. I think it's very involved. It's very emotional, especially for music that typically doesn't have any lyrics. Like there is a lot of soul behind your tracks. I'm just gonna highlight two that I've been listening to a ton. Cosmos of the Soul and Nakazora are two. I mean, Nakazora blew me away the first time I heard it. I was just like, this is phenomenal. It's just I wasn't sure what I was expecting when I first listened to it, but it was just everything I look for in an album a lot of times, and I look for really weird stuff myself. And Cosmos of the Soul, what I find most engaging about a lot of your songs and this might kind of sound funny, is their length. Like they're not short pieces. As you know, as someone who comes from, so I play bass. I played in a little rock band in college. I played in a little dad jam band. Well, we call it, only one of them's a dad. I don't have any kids, but it's like we just play covers or whatever. So like, I didn't get into music till college, till I was like 19. So and I always wish I had got into it sooner, because you know there's a lot I can't do, and I probably never will be able to do. But anyways, you know, I'm used to 2-minute songs, 3-minute songs, but like you load up some of these tracks and they're like 6 minutes, 7 minute, 8 minute, almost like you kind of mentioned, they're like existential journeys through the ether in a lot of ways, and it's such an experience to kind of put a song like that on and just have it kind of like playing. You know, I love one of my favorite things to do is to put them on at night when I'm driving home from like basketball. You know, it's dark out and you have this kind of ethereal music going, and it is just some of the most engaging work I've ever listened to.
Thank you.
And it's such, and again, maybe because the world I tend to play in myself from music thing, it's just like a different experience than putting on like, I don't know, like Weezer, or I don't know what modern bands are. I'm going to say Blink. I'm going to age myself. Blink-182. They just played Coachella, so that's
They did just play Coachella, yeah.
And they were pretty good too. So that's good for them.
I mean, listen, they were able to. I watched a couple like comparisons of like them playing like back in the day and them playing now, and I'm like, they're still holding it together. Like,
yeah. But where was I going? But yeah, it's just some excuse me, like just phenomenal work.
Thank you.
I also, you kind of mentioned your foray into video game covers. I think you have a whole album of Zelda covers, which a lot of people may say Zelda has some of the best video game music ever. It's definitely probably one of the more popular ones. What about video game music? Would you just consider yourself a big gamer? Is there like something about video game music that's really drawn to you, or like what about video game music kind of intrigues you?
Yeah, I mean, I am a gamer. It's my child uses my child who's 12 uses gamer as an adjective. It's like, it's an adjective. It's like, are you gamer? Like, how gamer are you?
Oh God.
Yeah, he's awesome. But and he's a huge gaming nerd. He plays. He knows more stuff you can do in Minecraft than I could ever imagine. But anyway, so I've been playing games ever since I got a Super Nintendo when I was a kid. That was my first system. Mm-hmm. That's why I covered Donkey Kong Country. Was one of the first songs I covered on the channel, was because like those games are some of my all-time favorite games. Yeah. And like when I started my YouTube channel, I was originally going to do like, I was really inspired by Pomplamoose.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard Pomplamoose, but like Jack Conte and
Yep.
Yeah. And I was really, really inspired by their covers. And I was like, that's the kind of, I want to do weird. And also, as I said before, I've always been a big Ben Folds fan, and he would always do these really, wacky fun covers of like he did like a Dr. Dre song and a Kesha song. And so like, I liked the idea of elevating the art of doing covers, right? So my channel was originally going to be like half just like weird arrangements of like pop songs. And like one of the first videos I put out on the channel was a cover of Lady Gaga. And then I got the idea, I was like, maybe I should do video game music. That would be cool. Like, I love video game music. And I had all these ideas for it, and people were like really reacting well to it. So I was like, I'm going to keep doing that. And as I've gone on, it's become this, it's, number one, there's a huge, nearly endless pool of incredible music that's behind video games.
Yeah.
I have a lot of emotional connection to it because, like, these games are the definition of, like, my childhood. A lot of these games are essentially tied to different memories of, waking up on Christmas morning and finding Donkey Kong Country 2, finding out my friend started smoking after we played Donkey Kong Country 3 together, and freaking out and riding my bike home in tears because I was a very good kid who would never do that. And I couldn't imagine the fact that my friend, like, I was a very like lawful good kid when I was young. So I was like, no, we don't do that.
Yeah.
So like I have these like really powerful memories tied to video games. and because of that, it's really fun to like channel those into some of my covers, and then other ones are songs I've never heard before, but I have like my patrons will recommend them or someone will leave a comment, and so it's like this really awesome, just never-ending supply of inspiration. And then because I believe really, I think the art of arrangement is something that has been kind of looked down upon in especially in American culture. Like cover bands are considered like, oh, you're just a cover band. And I've never held that opinion. I think that like some of my favorite songs are like really unique covers of certain pieces. And if you go more than like, you go back to, even if you just go back to jazz is all covers and rearrangements. It's all standards and everyone plays the standards. And like, that's kind of that was what I did in high school and college was I was really into jazz. So like the idea of taking a theme and a melody and making it my own, or taking what it was trying to communicate and trying to figure out how I would communicate that is just always like, it has yet to get boring or not fun. Yeah. So I keep doing it. I just released VGM 208 or 207 just came out, and I just finished, or I'm working on VGM 208 right now. So like I've done over 200 video game songs, and then I also started doing like movie themes and TV shows and stuff, and it just kind of, it very naturally developed. It was like, these are all my nerdy things I like. Hopefully you will also like the nerdy things I like, and if not, at least you'll like the covers I do because you like my music. That was always my goal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'd love to write music for a video game one day too. So like that's way up there on my list. Is someday I'd love to compose for a game, but games take a long time, and you have to know people and to get into it and stuff. So it's always messy. But I am, like I said, I'm writing music for a pinball game, so that is a game, and that's awesome.
That's true. Sometimes it just takes one, right? You get one, your foot in the door, and then someone's. I'm actually surprised you haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. Just given, because I remember, hearing your music for the first time, it made me think of, gosh, like, I'm gonna say 8-bit, but like old, like I had this really specific thought of like, it reminded me of like Final Fantasy Adventure on my Game Boy, but like upscaled 100 times. Like just the kind of like feeling of like playing a game, like that music in my head. Like that's what it kind of was like. Oh, this feels like it could be like a video game music, or it feels like it could be like that kind of type of genre, for sure. And I as someone who's used to be a gamer, I always thought music was one of the more underappreciated aspects of playing video games. I was always a big Zelda guy, but I used to be really into Mega Man. Mega Man X. That's has some still some of my favorite music out there. Gosh, Mega Man, that was really. I got really into Mega Man in high school and had a Mega Man website, and it was fun. It was fun times back when the internet was unlimited storage and unlimited bandwidth, and just were like, here you go, here's your Angel Fire website, like have fun.
Oh yeah,
go to town. Yep. So good times. So yeah, I mean, obviously, I can definitely tell you are someone who really like when they're creating their work, they really put a lot of like effort into it. I definitely think it comes across for sure, and what you've and some of the albums you've produced, which, like I said, are phenomenal. So I think so. When I saw again, so when Neon Dynasty came out, and I saw they had a soundtrack, and I saw I kind of looking at it, and it's like, oh, this is kind of interesting. They've never done this before. And looking at track names, like I see Amie Waters, like, oh my gosh, like I know that. I had this moment where I was like, this is like. I was like, I know her. Like, I see her music. It's so crazy to see her in this other world, because I knew you from like this totally different, like I said, from like the YouTube video game kind of podcast world. And hey, now you're making music for Wizards of the Coast, So I was wondering. So for those who don't know, Amie has looks like he had one song on the Neon Dynasty soundtrack, the Shadow of Boseiju, and then on the new Capenna soundtrack, which almost feels like might have been. Well, actually, they're both kind of, I think, right up your alley. Oddly enough, right? You have the synthy kind of like future cyberpunk world, and you have your kind of your jazz, given your background, like the jazzy kind of undertones. You had Midnight at Xander's and Cat Demon Waltz. So how did that come about? Like, did Wizards just reach out to you, Rand? Like, how did you get linked up with Wizards to work on those tracks?
Yeah, so that was all John. Jonathan Young is was like the producer of those soundtracks. It was his vision, his idea, and he was the one who reached out to Wizards and was like, hey, like there are all these really talented musicians on YouTube who would make awesome music for you if you would just give them a shot. And he was the one who like gathered all the different musicians together. And I met John at a con, and he was like roommates with one of my like close friends in YouTube music, Rich, who's Richati B. Him and I have done a couple like collab albums together. And so like I have never like really hung out a lot with John, but I knew of him and he knew of me. And when he was finally given the green light on Neon Dynasty, he was like, "Oh well, I need to ask Amie to be a part of this because the vibe is just too perfect."
Yeah.
And I was so honored. I remember when I first got the first DM from John, and it was like, "Hey, I've got a big project that I want to bring you in on, but I need you to sign an NDA first. Is that cool?" And I was just like, what? Like, that's just so exciting. I'm like, oh, okay, okay. And like, I've written music for a couple people in the YouTube world who have technically had me sign NDAs, but it's like, we didn't need to sign this. Like, this wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
Like, I wrote music for your video game YouTube show. It's fine. We didn't need to do all this silliness, but I was like, okay, whatever. Let's see what it is. And and then I get this NDA from Hasbro, and I'm like, wait, what? Why is Hasbro sending this to me? And it says like Wizards of the Coast in like the document text, and I'm like, oh, what? And I started to like kind of put the pieces together that like, and I remember like going to my partner AJ just being like, I just signed an NDA for Wizards of the Coast, the people who make Magic the Gathering and D&D. I don't know why, but that's pretty cool, huh? And then, John was able to tell me the details of this album we were going to put together, and I got to write that song on that one. And then for New Capenna, I actually reached out to him because I was like, "Hey, I know you reached out to me for uh, uh, for Neon Dynasty because it was very synthwavy,
Yep.
but I'm actually like." I have like a background in jazz stuff, and I would love to try to do like, and I said like basically I want to do this like smoky club 2 a.m. like future vintage synth meets like boozy jazz club thing.
Yeah.
Um, and that's I came up with a song that was originally I believe originally was going to be titled Midnight at Xander's Lounge, but couldn't call the song that because it implied alcohol.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, cool, we'll just call it, or it was Last Call. It was Last Call at Xander's Lounge was the original one. So I was like, okay, we'll drop the Last Call. Let's just call it Xander's Lounge. That's the name of the card it's inspired by. And like, no, can't do that. It's still implying alcohol with lounge. I'm like, it's on the card. That's not, where's my camera? There it is.
Yeah.
It's on the card. Like, it's the name of it. And they're like, no, so that's why it's called Midnight at Xander's, was because I had to come up with some kind of name that would technically work within the boundaries of what we're allowed to call it, which I thought was very funny. But those songs were really, really fun to do, all three of them, and especially the Xander's Lounge one, Midnight at Xander's, because like that was very much tapping into my roots and like the stuff I did in high school and college, and like also as like a kid, my dad would take me to jazz clubs and stuff, and we'd see legends of jazz get to play. I got to see Les Paul, the like inventor of the Les Paul guitar,
Oh yeah.
play.
Oh really? Oh yeah. He is. Yeah, he is. My when I started playing, my grandfather kind of turned me on. He gave me some of his old records to listen to.
Legend.
Yeah, and just the like you think about, you hear the name, you think just oh yeah, his guitar. Like no, he was he was he played too. Like he was definitely a guitarist. It's for sure. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
and he played until he finally passed away. He was playing shows in New York at this little Iridium Jazz Club, and I actually got to like play on stage for a song with him. I played saxophone.
Oh wow.
Um,
Okay.
which was really wild. Like we showed up, and my dad he had a friend who knew like the bassist who played in the house band, and so we got to go backstage and say hi. And I bought my first Les Paul in New York, and he signed it. And then I had just brought a saxophone with because it was the trip, and we were like all of our stuff was in our van, and so it was just in the van. And my dad was the one who was like, Les, what if kind of pitched the idea, and I'm like, oh no, come on. I'm a shy like high schooler, freshman in high school, and Les was like, yeah, let's go for it. And so he would regularly have guests play with him at his show, and I got on stage and played. I forget what the name of the song was. It's an old standard. I've got out my real book, and it was something else. I was super anxious, and then I got off stage, and the next guest on stage was Charlie Daniels. I was just like, what is happening right now? But yeah, so the point is that like boozy jazz clubs are something that I have very fond memories of, and I really want to try to capture that because that's what the card invoked for me. It was like, oh yeah, this gives me like, and I was like, I want it to be like late night, like the only people at the club are like either doing shady deals or I don't know. I always try to like imagine a scene for all of my Magic songs because it's, I don't know, the worlds that they create are so like, I'm very much like a worlds person. Like, the lands are my favorite cards almost always in every set. I'm always drawn to the settings of things.
Yeah.
And so like the idea of like, Shadow of a Boseiju is just like picturing the idea of like walking around in the shadow of this giant tree that's looming over this like, cyberpunk city and just kind of taking in everything and like what that moment of melancholy would look like. So, yeah.
Well, let me tell you, all the songs are fantastic, but I have to just compliment, Midnight at Xander's. First time I listened to it, that was literally in my head, just at one of those old, 1920s bars. Maybe there's like a singer on stage. You could smell it. The way you describe what you were going for is literally the vision I had in my head. So I will say, mission accomplished on that one. It was, it definitely evoked that, perfect feeling for that set. Obviously drawing inspiration from some Xander's Lounge card itself. Funny about the name, given the whole, that was a weird set. They had to do some weird stuff with like the halo and
Halo isn't drugs.
It's
not alcohol. It's not drugs. Yes, it's a white powder. Yes, we pour it into champagne flutes. Not drugs, not alcohol.
Exactly.
It's literal angel dust, but no, it's not drugs.
Not that angel. No, not that angel dust.
No, wrong angel dust.
Yeah. So that's funny. Well, I mean, that's awesome. I hope they.
Sorry, 1 second.
Oh, no problem.
I'm stuck. Here we go. This is my little container of Halo and my new Capenna champagne flute. That's not a champagne flute because it's not for alcohol.
No, not at all. It's a angel peaceful receptacle. I don't know. Who knows? That I will say, Wizards does take care of the creators with like some of the times it's the free swag you guys kind of get. That's well deserved, I would say for sure.
I was shocked at how supportive of us musicians they were. They're a big company, and I wasn't expecting them to be like do us dirty, but I also wasn't expecting I still get I get the royalties on the like streams. I get 100% of those. I was paid to write the music, and then they're also sending me like boxes of cards, and I was just like, this is incredible. Like, honestly, you probably could have been like, can we just pay you in cards? And I would have been like, yeah, it's fine. Like, but no, like they I got paid for the job. I get the royalties for my tracks, and I also got a bunch of free stuff. So that was very, very appreciated.
I think, gosh, the fact that you get all the royalties from the streams, I think is one of the coolest things I've heard. Because it seems, not that to really, big corporations, right? You think that was like you got paid, you get cards, but that you think that was something they would hang on to just by nature of being a giant corporation. But that's actually very, very awesome of them to to give that to you as well. Like that's wow. I'm actually very surprised. I would always say I'm pretty impressed. So that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, I wish we could do more. That's
Yeah.
always Wizards. If you guys ever want, I'd always love to. One of the things that I learned from that process was, anytime I'd go to an LGS, I would like ask them if they heard of the soundtracks.
Yeah.
Because I just wanted, I'm like, hey, have you heard of these? And like, it was always hard because I'd ask, and then they'd ask why I was asking, and then I'd be like, I really am not doing this to like name drop. I wasn't going to bring up the fact that I was involved at all. I just wanted to know if you've heard of them.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to know if they were like being listened to at all.
Yeah.
And what I learned over and over again is that most local game stores didn't know they existed. And when I brought up that they existed, they immediately went to like Spotify and like saved them to a playlist because they're like, we need music like this for our all ages events because picking music for events is really hard. And I know like my partner runs a skate park, and like when you do like an all ages event, it's always really difficult to do that balancing act of like, I just want to play whatever, but I know there's going to be parents who are going to get offended by certain things. So like, what do we do? It's like, we literally handed them like, here's music for Friday Night Magic. Like we've given it to you.
Yeah.
And they were so excited for that. And I feel like that was like, I think the idea behind the soundtrack was that it was going to be like kind of a parallel, promotional thing. Like, get people excited for the set. They did these like really cool, they did all sorts of stuff, especially for Neon Dynasty. And so it's kind of seen through that lens of we're paying for promotion.
Yeah.
And a part of me is like, I want to like refocus, because I'm like, if you could see this as like a part of like giving back to the community and like providing stores with like basically a soundtrack for like, the background music in Arena, but for in a store, like, a lot of shops would use that. And so like, that's, I've always thought about like, if they ever want to do these again, I know that there's a need and a want for that kind of stuff. I just think the idea of what we're doing with the music kind of has to reframe, but who knows, I'm just happy that I got to do anything. It was a lot of fun. And, I'm so grateful to John for reaching out to me. He's a great guy. He really, made sure that the musicians were treated well. And thanks to all the people at Wizards who, gave us a shot. It was such an awesome opportunity. Really, really happy that I got to do that.
Yeah, that's, it's funny. You make a really good point about, having your LGS have this as like a background music for pre-release weekend, or, F&M, just something kind of put on that's not going to, not going to offend anybody or anything, or, be overly suggestive or explicit. I'm actually, I was actually impressed or surprised really that they did the new Capenna one, and I don't know, maybe because Kamigawa, the original block, didn't sell so well, so they felt they needed to really have a big promotional surge for it, because they did the soundtrack, they had like the anime intro kind of little video clip, which was really cool.
Hatsune Miku, I think, did something for that one.
Yeah, something like that. So it looked, everyone was like, could this be the show? Like, they're supposed to be in show, like, in the development. Gosh, they're supposed to be in a show in about like 2 or 3 years now. But I was like, could this be this? Just do this. Let's just have this be a show. Like, this looks phenomenal. And then, Capenna came out, and then they had the second soundtrack, which was really cool. So, I hope they go back to that idea. I don't know, Capenna and Kamigawa had pretty distinctive art styles, so maybe that's part of the plan, is if they go somewhere that really has like a really unique kind of style. I'm almost surprised they didn't do like a metal album for Kaldheim. That almost seems like it could have been a no-brainer right there.
They did some amount of metal music for Kaldheim. I know that was before I was involved in it, but I know they did some sort of metal music for that one.
Yeah, and that's, I guess it's the problem. There's a disconnect, I think, sometimes between like the Twitter Magic world and like the LGS, like what's actually the people on the ground, because the fact that you went into and people didn't even realize there was a soundtrack, like you would feel like that would be something they would be promoting pretty heavily for people to listen to,
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a consistent problem with, if there's a disconnect. I don't know if it's just they don't, if the marketing team isn't big enough. But I think they've talked about, like Mark Rosewater has talked about, like there's a decent chunk of people who play Magic who don't even know what a Planeswalker is. I don't know if that's like the card type or the actual like
concept of what a planeswalker is.
Yeah, and you would think with a game as big as Magic, and now, gosh, planeswalkers have been around now for Lorwyn. When was Lorwyn? A long time. Like it's been a while, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of opportunities. Sometimes I work in marketing, so maybe that's probably just how my brain works. Like the kind of stuff you can really like highlight in terms of like building the brand in slightly different ways than here's another collector booster frame, or here's another so and so thing, which I get. What I understand that aspect of the business, but I think there's other ways to kind of build a brand too that could be a lot more engaging and interesting. And who knows? I mean, a lot of times companies do these things as kind of like test runs, and then if they do well, they implement them more down the line. So hopefully we've not seen the last of Amie Waters on Magic the Gathering soundtracks. I look forward to whatever they have next for everybody.
I'm open and ready for whenever they want to bring us back. It was an awesome opportunity.
Well, I'll start tweeting. I'll start a campaign, just hashtag like soundtracks, and I'll just like, hey, Amie Waters has done a few things. Maybe they'll have you do a whole album. That would be kind of cool. Or even like I can imagine a world where they could have sets where like maybe you don't do a full album, but maybe it's like I always forget which one's shorter or long, like an LP or an EP, like a 4 or 5
EP.
song EP,
Yeah.
right? Like that would be something I feel like would be reasonable to ask one person to do, and you're not, you don't need a full. I don't know. It's just stuff like that. I feel like it's like right there. It's right there. You can have that one for free, Wizards. Like here you go. Here's a cool idea for you to do. Just bring these, and you can get like these unique musicians on to kind of create the atmosphere you're looking for in these kind of new planes. But what do I know? But hopefully, so we'll see.
I'm very grateful that we got the chance. I know that in a big company, where it's Wizards is on its own a very big company, and then Hasbro is on top of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that it goes through before I get to the people I was talking to, and the people I was talking to were very supportive. They were very like energized and jazzed about the project. But it gets passed down through so many people, and I don't know what those people who are talking to the people who are talking to the people were looking for, or if they want more of it. Like I said, I'm just grateful for the opportunity, and I'm always open and available to do more music for things like this, because it's a lot of fun, and it's very much like the kind of thing I feel like my music is pretty good at doing, is conjuring up scenes and like setting moods. That's my vibe. So
exactly.
to get to do that again.
100%. All right, you can give I'll be the one yelling at Wizards like, no, give Amie more music to make. That'll be obviously you got to gotcha. So, anyways, so I want to. You brought up. I actually even have some notes. You brought up Dungeons and Dragons, and that I think you DM a lot of times. So I always like. So I've recently kind of been in a long-term play group after playing like one-ofs every now and again, and I kind of you've kind of alluded to this, where usually when I've had to play Dungeons and Dragons, I've had to be the dungeon master, because if I don't do it, none of my friends are like, they're interested enough to play, but no one's interested enough to learn how to like run a session. So I'm always curious about like your thoughts on playing Dungeons and Dragons and dungeon mastering, and what are like what do you enjoy about DMing, like in terms of like or like just like tips or ideas, like a world building, or just like what's your experience with Dungeons and Dragons? Like what do you like? How do you talk about if you have a play group or anything like that?
Yeah. So I played a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons around 3.5 was where I got into it, and I had a friend who was like really, really into D&D and really wanted us to play, and so we did like a couple smaller sessions, and we had a group that played I think like 5 or 10 sessions in a story, and then I really wanted to get some of my friends to play. Like that was my goal. It's like I want to bring it back. Let's play some D&D. And I know that like I just had this. It started as almost like it's like need, like someone's got to do it,
Yeah.
But also I had this really cool idea, and so that's where it all started with me. Is I really like world building. I really like map making, and I had this idea for a custom setting. My world it's the world of Atreus is the name of the world, and it is call it like a post apocalypse, or like I call it a rebirth, or Atreus Reborn is like kind of the overarching idea behind what I'm doing. And it's very inspired by both like the book Seven Eves by Neil Stephenson, which is a story where it's not really spoiler alert because it happens in the first like 20 words of the book, but the moon explodes and shatters into like a bunch of pieces, and then what would happen if that were to happen is like the story.
Yeah.
And the really cool thing about that book is like the first half of the book is like a love letter to orbital mechanics and like how space stations work, and it's very, very into that hard science side of things.
Yeah.
But then the second half of the book jumps like 30,000 years into the future, and it's like, what does the world look like after the world ends, basically, and now it's coming back to life. And so I love that idea, and it's also like Horizon Zero Dawn is very similar in the a world that has been reborn after an apocalypse, and the fun of like discovering what happened to the old world. And so that's kind of what I built up, and I wrote this whole story about all this crazy lore. One of my parties we've been playing now 3, 4, 5. I don't know how many years. What I do know is that if you go back in our chat logs long enough, I was shocked one day. I was like going through our chat logs, kind of going back to see like some really, really old piece of information from one of the characters' like starting descriptions.
Yeah.
And I scrolled far enough back that I was like, why are my friends dead naming me? Oh, this is before I came out. Okay, this goes way back. Like, so, it's at least 4 years then with that. And we've been going for a while. We've got like 30 sessions because we play, if we're lucky, we play once a month with that group. That group is all over the country. I've got a friend in Northern California and a friend in New Mexico and a friend in, I think, Michigan, who joins us occasionally, and then 2 people who live in Portland. But we get on Discord and we play all online. And they're at the point where they're starting to finally discover some of those secrets that I've been able to bury in this like crazy story.
Yeah.
And then I have another group that is just my partner and my other 2 friends, and it's like a much smaller story. Even though it's starting to get there, they just got a boat, and so they decided to sail across the ocean in their boat, and that was fun. But like for me, I'm really into things like NADPOD, Not Another D&D Podcast, or The Adventure Zone. I like fun D&D that is loose on, like, I'm not a super hardcore rule follower. I like D&D for the storytelling, and I D&D specifically to let my party members tell their story.
Yeah.
So as far as like DMing is concerned, like it's a lot of like, it's the tight walk rope of like yes anding on one side, and then on the other side knowing how and when to say no in a way that enhances the story. Like, no, you need a boundary. You can't, this isn't going to work. And then the most fun, when you let the dice decide, that's always like a party member will throw some completely audacious idea out there. I'm like, roll for it. Let's see.
Yeah.
And, it is the kind of story that it swings wildly. Like but my goal is to always have fun. So like, one of my favorite moments as a DM was, we just had this like, so I had this idea of, I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but a while back, people came up with the notion that like nuclear waste will last so long. Its half-life is so long, especially like the most like the most like dangerous stuff, that we need to potentially come up with a way to express that this is dangerous to a society that might not speak English, like that might not speak any language that is in any way connected to the way we currently communicate. How do we do that? How do we communicate? Because like if you think about like the pyramids, like they put warnings all over the pyramids, and we're like, ooh, warnings, let's go inside. Like, thankfully, Mummy's curses aren't actually too bad, hopefully. But with this, it's like this is a little more like concrete there's a real curse on the stuff that's buried deep underground here.
Yeah.
And one artist came up with this like really wild, hostile architecture to express this is dangerous, don't go here. And so there's like these huge jagged rocks, and like there's all these really cool like basically sketches and renderings of what they could do. And I thought that was just such a cool idea that I'm like, I'm going to have a thing like that in my world, and I'm going to have eventually one of my party members is going to find it. And so it's this like weird spot in the desert where like as you walk up to it, there's like these wild crystalline metal trees and jagged rocks, and then it's just giant black void that's like don't go here. And they of course they go there.
Yeah.
But so they did this whole thing. They almost died because they decided to break the sarcophagus, like the outer sarcophagus of this like multi-layered thing that I was like, I'm going to put this in like 4 layers, and if they break through the second one, they'll probably die. But if they only break the first one, hopefully they'll get the pick up on the bad vibes and leave. And they did. But the problem was that it was like, this is like a source of immense power, so obviously, if you have a source of immense power that you just cracked open, a lich is going to be drawn to it. So they go outside, and they're doing this wild battle with all these like shadow creatures, and it gets ended because this lich shows up. And like, I set it up where like I had, I forget who wrote the song, but it's the one that like goes, dun 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 dun, run. It's like a meme song.
Yeah.
And I had that like queued up, and we were playing on Zoom at the time, so like you could actually play audio. I had it queued up, and I like read like the recap for what happened the week before, and I'm like, and like this like koala comes down from the sky and looks at you and says, and then I hit the song, and it went run, and like my friends were like freaking out, and we got into the story, and they like ran away from this lich. They were saved by a character that they met earlier, and they're like in this like heavy moment, right? So like this like ancient being just sacrificed itself to them to save them, this coatl, and they almost died. One of my party members literally almost had his soul ripped out of him, but he was able to like super crit himself out of it with like a really successful roll.
Yeah.
And we're standing on the edge of this giant black disc. That's what they've been walking on, is this black stone disc, and it's like 20 feet down to the ground, and they're trying to figure out a way down, and one of them just jumps down, does a successful check, is fine. And he's standing down there, and he's like basically catching everyone else as they jump down. And the final guy comes up, and again, we're like heavy emotional moment here, like big emotional stakes. And he goes, I reach my arms out, and I say, with arms wide open, and I swan dive out. And I was like, all right, roll for it. And he rolls a like 19. I was like, all right, you do the most eloquent swan dive. We put on Creed. We built up the moment. And I'm like, all right, the guy on the ground, roll to catch him.
Oh,
and he rolls a nat 1.
Oh.
And so he ends up, the guy tackles him. He drops, and he hits the ground, and he takes 1 point of damage and gets knocked out. And so it was just like one of the greatest moments I've ever gotten to DM was that moment, because of just all of the weight of what had just happened, and the silliness of what was going on, and then the way the roles ended up playing into the moment. Like that's always what I'm trying to go for as a DM. I want that balance. I want, because it's so much fun when that nat 1 shows up in that perfect moment that you can figure out how to tell the story in a fun way. But yeah, just for me, it's about having fun. It's about making sure that my players are all having fun, making sure that we're checking in with each other, and that we're telling a fun story, that no one's like feeling left behind. And my big thing is that my world is very dynamic. I basically threw my players into a world and then breadcrumb. I like say like, oh, here's a thing you guys noticed. Did you see that weird purple light over there? Here's another thing. And then they get to choose which things they follow.
Yeah.
And there's a point right after that big silly moment where I had set up all this stuff for this weird thing in the desert, right? And now they have an airship and they have a map. And it's like I've really led up to this point with like, maps are rare in my world, like especially like a world map. It's this, you've never seen something like this before. You're seeing the whole world in front of you. You've never seen that. and you have this like stone etching that lays almost perfectly over the map that shows X's, and one of the X's is where you just were in the desert, and there's 3 others. And they're like, nope, we're going to go to the Crystal Island with the dragon. And I was like, okay. And so then they go to the Crystal Island with the dragon, and there's a city by that Crystal Island, and I'm like dropping little breadcrumbs of like, as you're in the city, you see like a little hand pop up and grab a piece of trash and then duck back down underneath the sidewalk, and they find out that there's like this underclass that's keeping the city clean, and it's like, are we going to do a worker uprising? What's going to happen here? Leaving some breadcrumbs. And they're like, no, we're gonna meet the dragon, we're gonna leave, we're gonna talk about doing the worker uprising thing, you're gonna do a bunch of prep for that, but then we're gonna go into the desert instead, and we're gonna find a portal in the desert, and we're gonna be stupid enough to walk through it. And so now they're in a totally different place, very, very far away from where they were, and I basically had to like, it was one of those moments that I wasn't in any way prepared for, and I thought I had enough safeguards to be like, I'm not railroading, but they're going to have to jump through like 10 hoops to end up in this place.
Yeah.
And they managed to do the wildest backflip through all those hoops. And I'm like, hey, I got to give it to you. You're here. You get your reward. And so they're basically in a place where it's like, here's all the lore that you have been missing out on. Here's what's actually happening because you're with people who know it. And that's, that's for me, that's a big part of the fun of D&D. It's giving your players a world to have fun in, and providing them with interesting situations that they can do their thing in, and, trying to take a step back when you need to, and taking a step forward when it feels like things aren't going like, they don't know where to go. It's, it's just fun improv. Like, and it's been like 4 years now in this world, and it's really, really fun. I feel like my players are finally getting to the point where it's like, they could seriously mess something up. And that's what I've been so excited for.
Yeah.
There's another smaller D&D thing online where one of the stories was that they found this weird dimension door, and they went through it, and they ended up in like a demonic world. And they're like, well, let's go explore the demonic world for a little bit, but we'll leave the door open so that we can get back out. And he's like, you sure about that? And they're like, yeah. He's like, okay. So when they got back out of the demon world, their whole world was infested with demons because they left the door to the demon world open. And I thought that was like, the fact that this DM let them do that and allowed his world to be changed so dramatically was so cool. I was like, that's what I want. I want my players to be the wild legends who did the crazy stuff that broke the world. Like, that's what I want. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyways, I could rant about D&D forever.
That's great. As someone, there's two ways. Like, you could be a player, you could be the DM, and in my typical D&D session, I'm just a player. But I also run with my like not super invested friends a Space Kings night where I DM using the Space Kings system. It's a lot easier for them to understand. And I think everyone who plays any of these games in their life should at one point just try being a DM, because you have to experience the, I don't say pain, but the pain/joy of, spending hours working out a whole session and then sitting down with your players and having them someone just like, oh no, we're going to do this instead, or just totally go off in a different direction. And you just being like, oh, okay, well, let me just, all right. And just kind of having to try to like, wing it, or, obviously probably if you were better at it than I am, have maybe some idea, like, in case things go crazy. But that's part of the fun, as I think, is letting the players think of situations, because you try to I think a lot of times as a DM, you try to ration out everything they could do to mess up your plan, but then they'll be that one thing, or someone like, oh, I'm gonna try this, and you're like, oh, I never thought about that. Well, let's see what happens, And I think letting your players have that freedom to kind of to adjust your story like that is part of the fun of making of being a DM. Repeating myself there, but yeah, that's I think that's really because that it gets you engaged, I think, as a play, as a dungeon master, because you're not just like, okay, you guys are gonna do this and you fight these guys, everyone roll dice. I think part of what makes it fun for controlling the narrative is allowing the narrative to bend and flex as people try or do different things you didn't initially think of.
And it's also making sure you find a good party member that jives with your style of play. We don't do a ton of combat. We are very roleplay heavy. We
Wow.
will. One of my parties, the party that's been going forever, did a. It was 2 sessions. It was across 2 separate sessions, and it was all shopping. It was
Oh,
all
wow.
shopping in one city, and they said it was the most fun they've ever had shopping in D&D. And it was because like I set it up that they were in this. I almost thought of it like the spice bazaars
Okay.
in like Egypt and stuff, where it's like, or like in Morocco, where it's like if you go there, from what I've understood only from like travel TV shows and stuff, you really need a guide to lead you through it to find like the legitimate ones and the illegitimate ones and avoid the grifters and find the really good stuff. Like you need a guide to get through these places because they're huge and they're massive and there's everything from like really high quality stuff to total garbage, and it's really hard to know which is which if you don't know. And so I kind of created this like pirate city. It wasn't really, but it's like a port city that has that. It's this huge like bazaar of shops, and my plan was to have one of the members of the party was from this town, so he was going to be the guide. But his backstory is that he hasn't been here in like 10 years, and in that 10 years he joined a cult and got brainwashed. So, but he's also an extremely cocky, but like not in a bad way. He's like, no, I know what I'm doing. Let's do it. Like he just is always ready to go. He's like, I can do that. Yeah, let's go. And so he's totally convinced that he knows the city. And so what we did was we would roll. I would roll 2d20s, and it would the first roll, if it was over 10, would say whether or not he thinks he knows that this place is safe or sus. Like what does he think?
Okay.
And the second roll would determine if he's right or not.
Oh,
And
that's
so
clever.
that was my whole. So they would go to a place, and they were trying to figure out the logic of it because, like, they went to the first place, and he's like, "This place is definitely super sus. We shouldn't trust them." And it was like totally above board, very chill store. And then the next one, he's like, this place is the safe place." And it was literally like the basement of a basement, and there was like Nosferatu was chilling there, like, "Yes, please come into my shop." And they're like, "Nope, nope, nope." And so they're like, they think they're figuring it out, like, okay, he's just always wrong. But then I gave them one that was like, he was right, and because that's how the dice rolled out. And one of the hardest things is to hold my tongue on what I'm doing. Because I just want to be like, guys, I want to tell you the cool system I came up with for how we're doing this. Or like, oh my God, I really want to tell you all the stuff you didn't do, or all the stuff you missed, or like the time they ended up in this portal and it took them to like this other dimension. Like, I really wanted to tell them all the things they did that I had prepared for so that this wouldn't happen, and how they managed to skip all of them because it was so wild, like the amount of steps they missed or skirted around or came up with their own solution to. And I was just like, my hardest thing is I want to tell them. I want to tell them how to solve the puzzle. I want to tell them all the backstory. I'm like itching for them to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I just have to sit there like, it's like when you watch someone play Portal and you're like, I know how to do this. I've played this game. I know how to solve it. Why you're doing it wrong? Like, but like learning to love that feeling, because every time they've done it wrong, it's led to great storytelling, and that's what matters. Like, not taking your role too seriously, being willing to let mistakes happen, knowing your players, and just like one of the things I always do is I check in with my players through their characters. So like every couple sessions, I'll be like, hey, so what is Axel is one of the characters. Axel Thunderbolt. He's a wrestler, barbarian. Like, how's Axel feeling right now? What's going on? Like, how's he feeling about the journey? Is he like, just how does he feel? And then let the player explain how their character is feeling, and I can get a really good feeling of what both the player's looking for through what the character, or what the player's looking for through what the character wants. And then I just kind of, again, I plan, but I don't over plan, and it's more like just, it's like setting up a town, coming up with some town politics, and then being willing to just run with it on the spot, wherever it leads. Just run with it.
Yeah, it's funny how things, if you create like a story or like a situation, how what may seem obvious to you, like, oh well, they're obviously gonna like do this thing. You get the players going, and they don't even have a clue. You know what I mean? Don't even think about that idea, and then watching them try something else, and you go like, oh, well, I didn't think of that. That's cool. And being able to like adjust the story and let him tell the, like you said, kind of tell this, have them tell the story. But as you kind of shepherd them, I think that's probably one of the most enjoyable parts of the game. And it's funny too, like you talk about play styles. I have my play group. I enjoy more of the portions when we're just like we're talking to people or we're investigating or like we're I'm a I have a wizard, so he's like really good at Arcana and history. So like, oh, like, do I know what this is? Like, do I know the history of this? And then my buddy, who's like, the Orc Warrior, just wants to like smash things with his axe, right? So like, that's that's kind of the beauty of the games. That dichotomy of like, it's kind of everyone can kind of get a little. Well, if it's I think if you keep that in mind as you play, get everyone involved and have everyone can enjoy themselves. So. That's too funny. Well, I can definitely see you do enjoy your Dungeons and Dragons at the world building just to playing because it sounds great. I mean, it sounds like you got some good groups there, so that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm just really happy that we're still telling stories in my world.
Yeah. And that's story. I think the storytelling that's definitely the key a lot of times with these sort of games. So. So, Amie, I don't want to keep you too much longer. You've been fantastic. So, just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, so we kind of talked before. What I usually do with my guests, I have them pick a charity and make a small donation. It's just like a small thing to do as coming on the show. And I know you're still going to look into some stuff. So, probably by the time this episode is ready to go, we'll have something picked out, and I'll post that on when I throw it out on the Twitter. Also, what I like to do with my guests is I'm going to pop up my community board, just like this, and then I talk a lot about community on the show, and that's kind of one of my biggest focuses, I think. So the Show and Tell show, I'm going to join your Patreon, so that way. I can kind of continue supporting you even after this is done and aired and what have you, and kind of it's just a small way to help you kind of continue pursuing and making fantastic music and being able to really be a musician. And I as I said, I gushed pretty hard at the beginning of the episode. I apologize, but I am a very big fan. I do really appreciate the work you put out. I do think it is some of the most phenomenal music I've really been able to encounter. So I just again I smallest thing I can kind of do. So we'll definitely pop that on there. And yeah, again, Amie, thank you so much for coming on. But before I forget, actually, we kind of you are graciously allowing me to have another special end credits theme this week. I'm gonna butcher this name again because I am just bad at pronouncing. But this week, if you stick around after during the credits, you can hear. I'm gonna try it. Occhiolism.
Yeah.
There we go. Occhiolism. Yeah.
Close enough. Yeah.
Close enough. From Cosmos of the Soul by Amie Waters. Again, fantastic album. Please check her out on Spotify. I believe you said YouTube as well. I'll link all that kind of good stuff.
Okay, YouTube, Spotify, Bandcamp. Actually, I did want to quick throw out May 19th. My follow-up to Cosmos of the Soul is actually coming out. You can pre-order it now on Bandcamp. I'm just like lightly calling it ASKAP because it's ASKAP J173-608.2-321635, which is the astronomical descriptor of a signal. It's a weird, irregular signal that's coming from the heart of our the heart of our galaxy, and it's it's one of those things that's like we can't really pinpoint what it is or what's causing it, and I think that's really cool. And the album is basically, as I was saying before, every album I have, I feel like you can tie to some pretty heavy or big or major or joyous life events. I wrote an album about my child being born. I wrote an album about my grandpa dying. I wrote an album about having, moving across the country and having a crisis of faith. And then, Nakazora, you're talking about, that's a fairly heavy album that's dealing with a lot of just really heavy feelings that I was dealing with in the time before Cosmos came out. And then Cosmos is like this, I like to call it was an epic queer synthwave rock opera or synthwave opera. I don't know. It's a synthwave rock opera.
Yeah.
And it's very much my story of finding myself and understanding my identity and coming out to myself in the world, told through the lens of a intergalactic space travel story. And so ASKAP is kind of following in that, and it's the idea of as opposed to being one big sweeping narrative, it's these small little messages that are sent out into the endlessness of space, and maybe if you're lucky, you can capture one and decode it and find like this like feeling or this emotion or this moment that someone else sent out into the universe. So it's kind of all these little moments of like things that have happened since I wrote Cosmos of the Soul that are all very much connected to those themes of like, you know, understanding yourself and identity and family and all sorts of stuff. So I'm really, really excited for that album. It's coming out, like I said, May 19th. And yeah, and all the other stuff's also out there. It's on Spotify, it's on Bandcamp, it's on YouTube. And I've got a Patreon, like you said. So
Yeah, so that's awesome. I will definitely throw a link to the Bandcamp for that album as well. You know, the best way to support creators is stuff like Patreon,
absolutely,
pre-ordering albums like Bandcamp, all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, that's awesome. Cannot wait. And if you like my show, if you're watching on YouTube, found me on Spotify, who knows? Feel free to throw me a subscribe. Hit that subscribe thing. Don't hit the bell. You don't need a notification. Subscribe to Amy's channel. Get her
hit the bell. Hit the bell.
Find me on Twitter. Find Amie on Twitter. So this is a fun little project of mine, but I'm trying to. I'm aiming. It's just going to sound really. You're gonna see how small my show is when I say this, but aiming to break 70 subscriptions by June, and then maybe 100 by the end of the year. So who knows? The sky's the limit.
Get that.
Attainable goals. Let's keep it reasonable. So, anyways, Amie, thank you so much again for joining me. I hope you had a good time. I thoroughly enjoyed being able to talk music and your experience with magic and just your dungeon master stories and storytelling as well. It was a great time. So
it was absolutely lovely. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. And everyone else, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.